this week I thought I would start with some quotes that you will probably find it interesting when considering whether Matthew was originally written in Hebrew or Greek. Here we've got a quote from Eusebius. He says, "So then Matthew wrote the oracles in the Hebrew language, and everyone interpreted them as he was able." So this is actually something that I want to get across. This week, everyone interpreted them as he was able. This week, we're leaving the studies of Nehemiah Gordon. I'm sure that he has covered some of these verses, but I didn't look at any of the stuff that he's put out on it. Instead, I was reading it from the Hebrew. Now, an important point to note is that I am not a Hebrew scholar. I can't read the Hebrew. I can't just read it on the page and know what it says. Someone who speaks Hebrew will be able to look at conjugated verbs, for example, and they would know what vowel sounds were there just by the consonants that were before or after the word. They would know how the verb was conjugated and its number and things like that. So they wouldn't need the vowel sounds because that would be dictated by how the verb had been conjugated. So I can't just read it off the page. I've got a reasonable grasp of a lot of the words that are used in the Bible and their meaning, but that can only ever go so far. I don't know very much about verb conjugation. I know a little bit, but in short, my expertise in Hebrew is non-existent. I'm not a Hebrew expert. You'll see the way that I have to go through Hebrew Matthew in this video. So what I would say to you is I am a part of the body that teaches other people, and as such the word tells us that Yehovah empowers people to do so by his Spirit. So I rely a lot on Yehovah's Spirit to show me what needs to be taught, and when I have questions, pray, asking for wisdom in those questions. But my knowledge of Hebrew is very little, and I would say to get the amount of knowledge I have of Hebrew, you could probably do so in a reasonably short amount of time if you wanted to start learning Hebrew. In Epiphanius Panarian, Matthew himself wrote and issued the gospel in the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, so this doesn't say that he originally wrote it in Hebrew. It just says that he did write it himself in Hebrew. There are passages that people put across as if they say that Matthew wrote the gospel in Greek, but really all they are is examples of when someone quotes something in Greek and then says it's from the gospel that Matthew wrote. There's a bit of a jump there in my mind, saying that he wrote it in Greek to this is the gospel that Matthew wrote, and this quote is a quote in Greek. I think it's more likely to be saying that, but we have quotes from these people who are the early church fathers who were saying that Matthew wrote in Hebrew. He actually penned the gospel in Hebrew. Eusebius, in History of the Church, he wrote, Bartholomew, one of the apostles, had preached to them and left with them the writing of Matthew in the Hebrew language, which they had preserved till that time. And you will find many such quotes about Matthew existing in Hebrew. Less about him actually having written it in Hebrew, but they were certainly aware of Matthew in Hebrew, and there are many quotes that say that he wrote the actual original in Hebrew, or that he was writing in Hebrew when he wrote the Gospel of Matthew. So these don't prove to us that Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, which is what we're using, is the original. But it does show us that they did have a copy of it in Hebrew, which was in circulation. And these kind of span from about 100 AD to about 300 AD, which is before even some of the New Testament was written. But anyway, I want to make the point about the Hebrew language, to make the point that I am not an expert, and I will make mistakes. Not to say that I have made mistakes, although one thing in particular was definitely a mistake. I put this word up on the screen. Okay, if you see this letter at the end, you read Hebrew right to left. This letter in the Hebrew Matthew is a vav. When I was typing it out using the Hebrew keyboard, I put this letter because it looked right. And this actually speaks to something that we looked at in the first part of the Sermon on the Mount, the poor in spirit. We looked at the difference between a yod and a vav, which would make the difference between ani and anav. It's just a longer yod, basically, a vav. So what the word should have looked like is this. I use the character that looks like a longer version of the vav. So you've got a yod, a vav, and this character, which is a final noon. But I think it really just goes to underscore the point that it's easy to make mistakes when reading similar looking characters. Like the Dalit and the Resh look very much like one another, but they would make the difference between Adam and Aram. Aram being from where we get Aramaic and the Arameans. So it's useful for us to understand that there are very little difference. Again, a yod, a vav, and a final noon. So when you are a scribe and you're transcribing thousands, tens of thousands of characters, it's easy to make a mistake in copying. And we saw some examples of where ani was supposed to be anav, and where anav was supposed to be ani, where you just get a note in the margin when the scribe noticed the error. Again, I'm not a Hebrew expert. Ashley has more experience reading Hebrew than I do. She studied it in college, university, so she has more knowledge and more familiarity with the Hebrew letters and reading Hebrew words. And she noticed that this was in fact incorrect. But just bear that in mind as we're going through. Matthew 5:13 in the Greek says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt becomes tasteless, how shall it be seasoned? For it is of no use but to be thrown out and to be trodden down by men." And you might wonder exactly what all of that is about. You are the salt of the earth. Well, exactly what is salt? What is the salt of the earth? And those questions are posed in the Greek. If we're looking at Matthew in Hebrew, then we want to look for the word for salt. So here we have a masculine noun, and it is melach, and that is mem lamed chet. Okay, melach. Now you might think, as I thought, well, that is a very similar sounding word to the word for king or the word for angel. Here we have the word melech, which is king. But you'll notice that the letters are different here. Mem, lamed, kaf, kaf sofit, in fact, which just means it's at the end of a word. So the kaf can take on the sound of a chet, as anyone who's read the Torah commentary will know. But mem lamed kaf is different from mem lamed chet. So we know that a different malach would be similar, which is the word for angel or messenger. But we know that they're different because the lettering itself is different, even if the words would sound similar. Just like we might call the fruit of a pear tree a pear, and we might call two of a type a pear in English. So if we look at the Hebrew text, we see salt is melach, mem lamed chet. Salt, in this example, it's got hay before it. It's hamelech, the salt. And then we've got be salted. So you might think, well, if it's a noun, then melach does not mean to do the verb salt something. But in Hebrew, the verb melach means or is spelled in exactly the same way, mem lamed chet. So we have that further usage. If we look at what the Hebrew text says, it says, at that time, Jesus said to his disciples, "You are the salt in the world." If the salt is neutralized, the English translation of the Greek that we have is if the salt has become tasteless. But in Hebrew, it is this word here, which is yivtal. Okay, yivtal gives us a good opportunity to understand something about the the Hebrew language and how we as non-Hebrew speakers can gain some understanding of it. All words have a verb root, and this word here, its verb root is beit tet lamed. The yod at the front is a way that the verb is conjugated, and it becomes yivtal. So if we look at the word beit tet lamed, then we would get the verb to cease. It's the verb batal. Yivtal is just a form of the verb batal. And the way that I found this out is that I used this. This is something that you can look up Hebrew words in. It was actually Ashley that looked up the verb. This will give the meaning of the verb. It's a dictionary. But more useful than that, it gives verses in which that word is used. So you can find the root word, and you can find some examples of verses so that you can use something like Blue Letter Bible to find out what the actual word is, and then you can get your entry like this. So Ashley looked up Beit Tet Lamed in the dictionary, got an example of a verse that it's used in. I would then go to the verse on Blue Letter Bible, and then I would find that it's this entry. So I can put this up on the screen. If we go back to the Hebrew, we've got the word neutralized, which means to cease. And then we have this word, ta'am. Okay, it doesn't really matter what form it's in. Here it is tamu is how you would say that word, and that's from this word ta'am. It's a modified version of this word, meaning taste or judgment. So when it says neutralized, what the Hebrew more says with a closer reading is it has ceased to taste. Interesting that this word can be used of judgment of something. We know of testing something by smell, by touch. Here, this word is to taste something and make a judgment about it. But that's not relevant in our passage. What we read is that it has ceased to taste. So the text that we're looking at says, at that time, Jesus said to his disciples, You are salt in the world. If the salt is neutralized in regard to taste, or if it has ceased to taste, with what will it be salted? And as we saw, that's the verb form of melach. When you salt something, just as salt can be used as a noun in English to refer to the thing that is salt, it can also be used as a verb to salt the ground, for example. It's the same in Hebrew. So we've looked at yivtal, the verb batal. Neutralized in regards to its taste would be Yivtal Tamal, or Tamu rather. Matthew 5:13, then in the Greek, says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt becomes tasteless, how shall it be seasoned?" And you can see how someone translating a Hebrew document might make cease to taste, might translate that as become tasteless, and it not be an inaccurate translation, but it being a translational choice. The idea that Yeshua spoke Greek to these people, as we've looked at previously, to me seems unlikely. Greek was a very common language. It's not impossible, but to me it seems unlikely. Now, with regards to salt, when he says, "You are the salt of the earth," we need to understand how somebody of the time would have understood what salt meant, what it is for. And at the time, if you look at ancient Hebrew writings of the time, or you've tried to discern historical context for salt, it was a preservative. It's something that you would put on something to preserve it. And that's an interesting concept when you think of us being salt in the world, or salt of the world, and you think of Lot's family being in Sodom and Gomorrah before they were destroyed. Their presence preserved Sodom and Gomorrah. Certainly not definitely what this means, but it is a possibility. The other possibility is that it's saying, since it talks about taste, it's what allows the world to be tasted or judged more accurately or more vividly. So we don't actually know what Yeshua means, but there are a couple of possibilities depending on what you pick up on in this verse. It says, "You are the salt of the earth" in the Greek. In Matthew 5:14, it says, "You are the light of the world." If we look at the Hebrew here, we see in verse 13, we see salt, and then it's be'olam, and then for light, it's be'olam, olam meaning world, in that usage. In Hebrew, if you're going to say in something, you use the beit as a prefix. So you would say be'olam, meaning in the world. Of the world might not really be a good translation, or it might be a presumption if the Greek was translated from the Hebrew. For example, Bereshit, the name of the first Torah portion, literally means in beginning. So if you are looking at a Hebrew word and you see at the beginning of it a hey, that means the, often, not always, often. If you see a beit, it means in. If you see a lamed, it means to, or for, or from. If we think of, is it light of the world? we might well think of John 9. Yeshua, when he healed the blind man, he said, "It is necessary for me to work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one is able to work. While I am in the world," Be'olam in Hebrew, "I am the light of the world," is what our English Bibles say. But the word "of" is not there. John 12:27-37 says, "Now I myself am troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from the hour," or this hour. "But for this reason I came to this hour. Father, esteem your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have both esteemed it and shall esteem it again." So the crowd who stood by and heard it were saying that there had been thunder rather than a voice from heaven. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Yeshua said, "The voice did not come because of me, but for your sake. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world shall be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, shall draw all men unto myself." And he said this, signifying by what death he was about to die. The crowd answered him, "We have heard out of the Torah," which would include the prophets and the writings. Torah meaning teaching and instruction. The idea that we have that the Torah is just the first 5 books comes from Judaism. Torah, the word means teaching and direction. His Torah is largely found in the first 5 books. That is what they would refer to if they were specifying the parts of all of the Torah or all of the Torah. That's what they would say constituted the law or the Torah, if they were talking about the Torah, the prophets and the writings. But equally you can use the phrase Torah to mean all of them collectively. And how do you say the Son of Adam is to be lifted up? We've heard the Messiah remains forever. How do you say the Son of Man has to be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Yeshua therefore said to them, "Yet a little while the light is with you, walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. And he who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you become sons of light." These words Yeshua spoke and went off and was hidden from them. But though he had done so many signs before them, they did not believe him. And I think that we can learn a lot from Yeshua's response here. Obviously, he was the Word made flesh. He could have explained to them all of the intricacies of, how it would be that the prophets and the writings and the Torah say that the Messiah would live forever when the Messiah was actually going to be killed. He could have explained to them and got into a debate about it. But he doesn't say that. He just keeps it very simple. He says, "Look, I am the light. Walk in the light while the light is with you." While the light is with you, walk while you have the light. He who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. So his response isn't kind of a technical rebuttal of their doctrine. His response is just very simple, and we see that these are not people who believe in him, regardless of the signs that he had done before them. They did not believe in him, which is often the case that you will find with people. So that's the sort of light that Yeshua is referring to when he says, I am the light of the world, or I am the light of the world, the Greek literally says. Therefore Yeshua spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall by no means walk in darkness, but possess the light of life. So he refers to himself as this light. And of course, he is the Word. And as we've seen recently, when we do the Word, we allow the light of Elohim to be seen in the world. So it doesn't really matter whether or not technically it should be you are salt in the world and light in the world, or you are the salt of the world or light of the world. I think it's in, but really it doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand the light that we are to be, the salt that we are to be. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, that shines ever brighter unto the perfect day. The way of the wrong is like darkness, they do not know at what they stumble. And I would suggest that that is actually what Yeshua is referring to. He says, he who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. I would suggest it would be with things like this in mind that he would say those things. Psalm 119, 105 says, the word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. So we can understand that the light that we are to be in the world, and personally I believe the salt that we are to be in the world, to make things have taste, is, or to be seasoned maybe would be a better way of putting it, would be to have the word of Elohim. The world is, you could think of the world as being very bland with all of its different types of sin, yet it has that one consistent element, which is that it departs from the word of Elohim. It is different from that. So when you come along and you do the word of Elohim, the way I say it is you are like salt among the world. And that is certainly true and borne out by the scriptures of the light that we are to be. If we think of New Jerusalem, which we read of in Isaiah 60, Jerusalem is supposed to be a light to the Gentiles. And Isaiah 60 tells us that in the kingdom it will in fact be so. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the esteem of Yehovah, or the glory of Yehovah, has risen upon you. For look, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But Yehovah arises over you, and his esteem is seen upon you. And the Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. And that's how I think of the salt also. It matters little what Yeshua was actually trying to get across to those people, because the message is the same. just as the Gentiles see the light that we have, that it is distinct from the world, and the Gentiles shall come to the light. It is true that if we are salt in the world, if we give seasoning in the world, then the Gentiles will see that what we have is qualitatively different. It tastes different. So if we continue in the Greek a little way, I'll show you a major difference in the idea of why we shine this light before men. As we saw there, Jerusalem is a light to the Gentiles. We will see that the common kind of Christian idea of why you should shine your light before men might not have been what was originally written by Matthew. So verse 14 says, "You are the light of the world. It is impossible for a city to be hidden on a mountain." So in the Hebrew it says, a city built upon a hill cannot be hidden, whereas in the Greek it said it is impossible for a city to be hidden on a mountain. It's a small difference there. Nothing that's going to really be significant to us, but it's worth noting there is a difference. So you are the light of the world. It is impossible for a city to be hidden upon a mountain, on a mountain. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it shines to all those in the house. And as we read in Isaiah, that's how Jerusalem will be. It's known as the city on the hill. Let your light so shine before men, so that they see your good works and praise your Father who is in heaven. So here we have a place that seems very important, where there is a large departure in what the Hebrew says to what the Greek says. This verse has always seemed strange to me. Let your light so shine before men, so that they see your good works and praise your Father who is in heaven. And I can get the idea behind it. Let other people see the good things that you do, so that they glorify God in heaven, rather than you for your actions. All of that kind of makes sense. The bit that didn't make sense is that's just not what people do. People don't glorify God when you do something good for them. So let's read what the Hebrew says. Okay, we've got, let your light shine before every man, so that show them your good deeds, which are praised and glorified before your Father. Here in the Hebrew, we have lepnei, or lepnei. Here, lepnei kal adam. Kal adam is all men. Panei is from panim, meaning presence or face. So literally before, in the face of men, all men. Let your light shine before all men is a great translation. And we've got to show them your good works, which are praised and glorified before your Father. Now, this makes an awful lot more sense, because that certainly is the response that you will get. Your good works will be praised and glorified before our Father. It's not true that when men see our good works, they give glory to God. However, it is true that if people know that we are believers, it's good for us to shine our light before them so that they can be drawn to it, so that the Gentiles see our light. That is certainly true. But it would seem untrue to me that men see those good works and glorify our Father. What actually tends to happen, we see in the life of Joseph. And it came to be that Yehovah was with Joseph, and he became a prosperous man, and was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that Yehovah was with him, and that Yehovah made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his eyes, and served him, and he appointed him over his house, and gave into his hand all that he had. So we know from Proverbs 3 that if we do such things, we will find favor in the eyes of man and in the eyes of Yehovah. The statement that men will see the good works and they will give praise to the Father is not really something with any scriptural foundation. The idea that the Father would see them and he would give us favor, that's right there, Proverbs 3. The idea that we would find favor in the eyes of man through doing good things, that's right there. We've got an example of it here. But the idea that they're going to see our good works and give glory to the Father, that's not found in Scripture. So it's my personal opinion that what is recorded in Shem Matthew is probably closer to what Yeshua actually said. Either way, it really doesn't make a difference. We should do good works before men, and not because we think that we're going to gain from it, and not because we think, well, if I do all these good things before them, then they'll glorify the Father. That is missing the point. We should do the good works before them anyway. So ultimately, it doesn't matter what Yeshua said. I'm just pointing that out. We should do good works regardless. Now in Matthew 17 it says, "Do not think that I came to destroy the Torah or the Navi'im, the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." In Hebrew, we have the translation is, at that time, Jesus or Yeshua said to his disciples, "Do not think that I came to annul the Torah." And that word that we have there is lehapel, I think. Now, if the two words that we want to consider in that passage are annul and fulfill. The word for annul there, lehapel, lehafer. There's no lamed there at the end. and that pay would be a fe sound for reasons that aren't important. Lehafer is how that would be said. Now, it's very difficult. I don't know of any way of doing it to get a Shem Tov Matthew that has strong numbers. So if you want to look at Shem Tov's Matthew and you want to be able to see, well, what is that word that is used there? And it's a vowel. Like, I can kind of piece my way through this sentence. Like, I know the words for Torah, for example. So I can look for that word within the passage and roughly know where I am in the English translation. And I know words like lo for do not think. I can use them as coordinates and make my way through. So I can see what words are likely to be the word in question. If I know that it's a verb, a tool that can be used is PLM. You would have to use a Hebrew keyboard. You can set your keyboard to do Hebrew characters. And I typed in this word, lehafer, and it tells me how the word is conjugated. Not only that, it tells me what the root word is. The root word is pei, reish. So knowing that root, I can then ask Ashley to look it up in the dictionary or look it up myself and find verses that root is used in. But you can see how kind of slow and mechanical it is for me to look at a Hebrew passage. I imagine that the part 4 of this series will take a while before it's offered as an option for you to choose, because there are things in it which are going to take a little bit of time for me to get my head around exactly what is being said. Things to do with marriage and divorce and things like that. But this tool allows me to see that this verb is being used in its hifil form, gives me the verb root. So go to the etymological dictionary, look up pei reish, then see what verses it's used, go to one of those verses, click on the word, and then find what the entry is. And since we have been told that it's the hifil form of the verb, we can see what the meaning is there. So when Yeshua says, "Do not think I have come to para," I think it would be para, the Torah, this is what he is saying. Don't think I've come to break it, to violate it, which is interesting. If we look where else this verb para is used, we see it in Jeremiah 31 to 32. It says, "See, the days are coming, declares Yehovah, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke." And that word is para, though I was a husband to them. So by breaking The Torah, what they were doing is breaking the covenant, because the covenant was an agreement to do what Yahovah would say. And then, of course, he gives all of the Torah to Moshe on Sinai, but they wouldn't do it. And that was them parroting the covenant. Yeshua says, do not think I came to parah the Torah. So he didn't come to break the Torah, parah the Torah. He came to fulfill it. You'll see that the word there is Lehashlim. Now, you might recognize the word shlim, as I said before. Lamed means to, for, or from. Ha means the. So we need to know what shlim means. And you might recognize the word shlim from a similar word, shlamim, which is the peace offering. Now, if we go to Blue Letter Bible, we can see the verb root of this word shlim, which is shalom, which we looked at in the teaching on shalom if you need a refresher. But interestingly, to those who are of the mind that what Yeshua did was complete or finish or end the Torah, it would lend itself more to this interpretation if you read the Hebrew. Of course, we know that shalom is a sense of bringing things to a fullness. So when Yeshua says, I have shalamed the Torah, or I've come to shalom the Torah, he means to do it fully. Don't think I've come to break the Torah. I've come to do it fully is the proper context. If we look at the word that's used in the Greek, plerao, it means to make full, to fill up, to render full, to complete. It's not the Greek equivalent of the word with its verb root being shalom. It's got nothing to do with peace. But if you were translating from Hebrew into Greek, it's a perfectly reasonable word to end on. Now, plerao doesn't necessarily mean to bring something to an end. In fact, I would say that it's more difficult reading it in Greek to think about bringing something to an end rather than to fill something up, to do it completely. In other words, Paul uses the word plerao to talk of preaching something fully in its fullness. So you can get that meaning from the Greek. But if we understand what shalom is, we understand what shalom is, then I think we get a more beautiful picture of what Yeshua came to do. He didn't come to break the Torah, and all would be fine. He came instead to do it fully, to bring it to its fullness. Matthew 5:18 says, "For truly I say to you, till the heaven and the earth pass away, one jot or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah, till all be done." So the English translation that we have here of the Hebrew says, "Truly I say to you, that until heaven and earth, and then in brackets we've got depart, not one letter or dot shall be abolished from the Torah or the prophets, because all will be fulfilled. Now, first thing I'll point out is heaven and earth depart. In Hebrew there you can see it says ad shamayim ve'eretz. And what that means is ad, until. It's a conjunction or a preposition, means until. Heaven and earth. Shamayim ve'eretz is heaven. Ve'eretz means and earth. So until heaven and earth. Now the translator has put in here depart, until heaven and earth depart, but there is no such verb used in the Hebrew. We don't know until what. Now this presents us with something interesting, because it could be, if the Greek was translated from the Hebrew, it could be that the translator did something similar here. Until heaven and earth are destroyed, or whatever he chose. Maybe it just said in the original, until heaven and earth. And now the one that we have in Greek has had that change. Probably it was, if it was like this, probably it was, the change would have been, with brackets or notated somehow at first, and then as it gets copied and copied and copied and copied, then the notation that it is a change is lost, and it just becomes a part of what the text is. And when the text gets copied, the change gets copied into it. So it could be that it's something similar. Sometimes it is useful to us to have the translator put something like that in. Like if you look at the first verse here, then his disciples came to him. Now the best that Ashley and I can figure is that is talking about here. It says Lamed Vav, one word there. As I said, Lamed is a prefix, means to or from. In Hebrew, if you remember, who, the Hebrew word who is he in English, and the Hebrew word he means she. So who is he and he is she is a good way to remember it. So le'u, possibly, and then we've got Talmudim, which is disciples. So the best we can figure is that it's to him, disciples, literally. And maybe for an English reader, that is made easier to understand by the disciples came to him, but the word bo is not there, which will be to come or to go. So maybe that aids someone's understanding of what's being said. Maybe it would just be better if it said to him, the disciples. So there are reasons that these things are done, but maybe heaven and earth departing or being destroyed, maybe that's an addition of the translator, and this is actually what the Hebrew says is the original, until heaven and earth, ... If we look at the English translation, we see that Yeshua said that he was going to fulfill the Torah, and then he makes reference in verse 18 saying all will be fulfilled. Truly I say to you, that until heaven and earth, not one letter or dot shall be abolished from the Torah or the prophets, because all will be fulfilled. So we might expect that would be the same Hebrew word if he's trying to use the same concept. The Torah being fulfilled, all things being fulfilled. We see, though, that it's a different Hebrew word. We've got le hashlim, as we saw, and then if we type that word there that's on the bottom in the Hebrew into Pialim, it comes up with this entry. It gives different ways in which it might be written. It says if it's got a lamed at the front, then it would be a lamed and a hey. It would be tekayem. The root being kuf yod mem, which is kum, which is to lift something up. In this form, though, we can see that it's talking about to fulfill, make true, to maintain, to exist, take place, to be carried out of, to be true. Okay, so we can get a rough idea, existence, the implementation of something. We can get a rough idea of what is being said. So the translation fulfilled is fine, but maybe it's misleading after the other fulfill, which is a different word. Truly I say to you that until heaven and earth, not one letter or dot shall be abolished from the Torah or the prophets, because all will be brought to existence, or brought to be, might be a better translation. But you get a better idea by understanding that the Hebrew word is different. Verse 19 says, "Whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." The Hebrew is slightly different, but I think that the key to understanding this verse is there in the Greek and in the Hebrew, and that is, they shall be called. In the kingdom of heaven, one who breaks the least of the commands and teaches men so shall be regarded, might be a way to understand it. Whoever does and teaches them, he shall be regarded great in the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't mean that they're going to be in the kingdom of heaven. All it means is that is what they will be called in the kingdom of heaven. So I think this is something which confuses people, that people who break their commands are going to be there in the kingdom of heaven. But I think it's just how they are regarded. In the Hebrew, you can see the word kara. This is the word that I knew that I was looking for when I was looking through the Hebrew. Kara is to call something. You get words that have kara as part of it, like mikra, which is what the feasts largely are. You've got the mikra, which the connotation being that you are called to them. And then you've got the atzera, which are the ones that are mandatory, that you must go to. Most feasts are mikra, of course. Here, there is a yod before kara. So it's the kuf resh aleph at the end, which is kara. So maybe this is yikra or yakra. Again, a speaker of Hebrew would know, but I wouldn't. So it says, "He who shall transgress one one word of these commandments in the Hebrew, slightly different there. And shall teach others, shall be called a vain person. So vain, the word is havel or haval, but the hey, veit, lamed, is that, let me see. Yeah, hey, veit, lamed is the word. If we find it on Blue Letter Bible, we've got haval, it's a verb, to act emptily, to become vain, or to be vain. Being vain is, if you think of something that is fruitless, something that is done in vain, or a vain person is a person who is not fulfilling their purpose. You might also describe them with the word ra. This is actually the verb root of Abel. His name in Hebrew is Havel, and that has the verb root of Haval, which shows that you can't always go off people's names to find out their character, especially when they are names that are given by men, as most names are. I think people get caught up in that idea. Okay, so if we look at the idea of being called vain, we've got also being called great. And we see, first of all, if we look at this phrase, we've got the word gadol yikra. Gadol is the same word that is used of the high priest, who is HaKohen HaGadol, the high priest. Gadol just kind of means great. There's not an exact translation, but great is okay. The great priest sounds kind of weird, though. If you were going to say that a fish was big in Hebrew, you would say hadag, hadag hagadol, the gadol fish, not really the great fish, but the big fish. I believe that's the phrase that is used in the book of Jonah, for the big fish that swallowed Jonah, not a whale that swallowed him. That's an interpretation. But Gadol Yakra means great, he shall be called, the Yod, making it, I think, imperfect tense, something that is yet to be done. So Yakra, he shall be called great, Gadol, great. So in the kingdom of heaven, the one who does the Torah and teaches others the same shall be called great, or shall be called Gadol. Matthew 5 verse 20 says, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." In the Greek, the scribes and the Pharisees. If we read it here, the English translation of what the Hebrew says, it says, if your righteousness is not greater than the Pharisees and the sages, not the scribes and Pharisees. So where does that come from? Here it says, Meha Farusim or Farushim, which I presume is Pharisees. And then the next word is Veha and the and I think it's probably Chakamim, based on the wise being Hakam in the scriptures. So the Hakamim would be the wise plural. You can see the word that is used usually for scribes. There is a Hebrew word for scribes, and that is Safar. So Safar would be the word that we would expect to find there if it was talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. In the Hebrew, it's saying the Pharisees and the wise ones, the sages. The English translation of being the wise ones would probably be the sages. So Yeshua is saying, unless your righteousness exceeds the Pharisees and the sages, then you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So at that time, Jesus said to his disciples, truly I say to you, if your righteousness is not greater than the Pharisees and the sages, and as we've seen, the sages is Hakamim, Hakam being wise. But he says, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven if your righteousness is not more than these people. Of course, those people may well have been thought to be righteous, but Yeshua calls them out as actors, hypocrites, those who are just playing the part of the righteous. So you could take it that what he is doing here is he is causing them to question whether or not the Pharisees and the sages actually are righteous. We know that he says, listen to what they say, do what they say when they sit in the seat of Moses. That is where the Torah will be preached from. But don't do after their works, because they say and do not. Actually, the Hebrew Matthew has an interesting rendering of do what they say when they sit in the seat of Moses, but do not do after their works. Is slightly different and kind of says something more like, don't do their oral law, which I would say is probably more accurate and more likely to be true. But either way, Yehovah willing, I will see you next time.